Steve Felsigno, good morning.
There. Okay. I thought it was a board member's voice I heard. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
You started the recording, Simon?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. I would like to call to order the Hartford Municipal Subcommittee of the MARB, and the time is 10:04. We do have a quorum. And I do not have any opening remarks today. It looks like a heavy agenda, but I think that it'll probably move rather quickly. We had an ask to move an agenda item. I'm going to see where we pace out and then decide if we should move one agenda item up for the to assist with the grand list, as the assessor has a hard stop today, and we want to make sure Hartford has that. Julian had given us that request. So Andrea, I don't any other opening remarks for the group?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Then let's move on to the approval of the minutes of January the 26th. Included in your packet today is the draft minutes. And if there's any discussion, otherwise I'm looking for a motion.
Motion to approve, Steve Felsigno.
Thank you, Steve.
Second.
Thank you, Mark.
Actually, that was Mr. White.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I did write Bob White, but I said the wrong name. Ooh. Thank you, Bob. Any other discussion? Okay, I hear none. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. White, I didn't hear you.
Aye.
Thank you.
This
All
new
right.
computer trouble.
Any abstentions? Nope. Okay. The motion passes and the minutes have been approved. Let's move on to review, discussion, and possible action of the Hartford contract assistance and bond refunding. With us today is Deputy Treasurer Sarah Sanders. I'm tongue-tied now, Lord. And she's going to give us an update on the actual contract assistance and where we are at. I know that we've heard about some of this, and Ernest, her bond attorney, is with us too.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, and thank you for making a little time this morning on the subcommittee calendar for discussion of this upcoming refunding of the Hartford bonds for the benefit of the state of Connecticut. I believe we provided to you for this meeting a 2-page summary that we updated the savings anticipated from the refunding, which will continue to change, as well as a draft MARB resolution. With me today is Ernie Lorimer, bond counsel to our office, who's assisting us on this transaction. But as we had indicated earlier, we're looking at the request of the Secretary of OPM and the State of Treasurer's Office for the City of Hartford to issue refunding bonds so that the state can realize savings on those opportunities in the market to reduce the cost of that debt service. We're anticipating current market is about 13 million over 10 years, but that will change with the ups and downs of the market. Several approvals are required. On Monday night, the Hartford Subcommittee of Operations, Management, Budget, and Governmental Accountability approved a resolution that will now go to the full Hartford City Council on Monday on the consent calendar, is what I understand. So today we wanted to brief the subcommittee, answer any questions that you might have before this goes to the full MARB on April 13th. And trying to think what else to say. I just will open it up to questions. And that's really, I think, where we are. We have, as I said, a draft resolution. If you have any comments on that, we'd be happy to look at those.
Mr. White.
Yes, I read the draft resolution, and there is a provision that MARB will approve it only if the refunding bonds shall improve the financial condition of the city. I mean, this seems like a no-brainer, but if you could just comment on that since we're asked to make a finding.
Ernie, can you comment on that? I thought it was really more contingent on actual savings.
I was just reading the
Yep.
The
The
last
last
whereas.
paragraph.
the last whereas.
The
We're
last
tracking
whereas.
the statute, and I think you can look at it two ways. One is that once we refund the bonds with these refunding bonds, the general obligation bonds of the city will be retired. They'll be redeemed with the proceeds of these new bonds. And the new bonds are revenue bonds, which are not payable from any source other than the state contract assistance payments. Now,
Okay.
the state is making the contract assistance payments now, but in theory, these roughly 138 million of bonds that are potential refunding candidates are general obligations of the city. After we do this, they won't be on the books of the city. So sort of in addition to the debt service savings to the state, which is why we're doing this, this removes the obligation and improves the financial condition of the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If I hear none, I think that we're looking for a recommendation from this subcommittee to go to the full MARB, excuse me, to go to the full MARB and take action. A recommendation for the full MARB to approve the City of Hartford's resolution authority and the issuance of the sale of not to exceed $138 million for refunding bonds.
I move that we so recommend.
Thank you, Mr. White.
I'll second.
I'll second that motion.
Oh,
Steve
I have-
Alsigno.
I have a second. Thank you, Steve, from Andrea. Any
Oh,
other
Oh,
discussion?
sorry.
That's okay. I hear none. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
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 Thank you. All right, motion carries. We will ask you to please join us at the full MARB meeting and move forward with finalizing this. And thank you all for all of your hard work with this. I've participated in this, but I know that this is a mountain that we're moving just to move off 138 million of bonds. But the excellent work of the Treasury has really done an awesome job, I have to say. So thank you so much for all of that hard work
Thank you.
and saving the state some money. Great to see you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye now. So let's move on to agenda item number 4, which is review and discussion and possible action of a tentative agreement with the Hartford Board of Ed and the Hartford Federation of Children Development Association Local 1018F. And this labor contract will be in effect retroactively from July 1, 2018 through June 30th of 2026 for 61 child development associates. This particular tentative agreement is looking for a 2% GWI, which will be retroed to August 25th, 2022, and each year thereafter, plus step movements until June 30th of 26. I'll bring to your attention that they went from 4 years with no increases and no step. So, Chief Penn, I'm really happy to see that you have this contract put forward for us. And I'm going to ask you to please, or do you have an attorney to give us?
No, I'm covering it today.
Okay, and I see
All
that you
right.
have a question, Andrea. Oh, excuse me.
Yes, just for clarity, you had mentioned August 25th. I think it's August 23rd of 2022.
I thought I read in the contract that it was 25th. So I will look for clarity.
Okay. These are 10-month employees, so it would have been whatever day we had everybody come back. So thank you for the introduction. Child Development Associates are our co-head teachers in our pre-K classrooms in our neighborhood schools, not our magnets. These are non-certified positions. This is one of our smaller groups, 61 positions total, 57 of which are currently filled. As Ms. Kennison mentioned, this is a contract that had expired in June of 2018. There's a retro that will be in place with STEP and GWI back to the beginning of the current fiscal year. And then it's 2% GWI and STEP movement through the duration of the contract. Notably, this contract was ratified unanimously by the union members after we had our TA in place. So I think they're quite happy with having a new contract, and frankly, after waiting that long, so would I be.
Definitely.
So if you look at sort of like other changes in the contract, there's some minor changes around tuition reimbursement, which brings them in line with changes that we've made in other collective bargaining agreements in the last several months. I would point out that this is now the 9th new collective bargaining agreement we've brought before you in the last, say, 18 months or so. Out of our 12, there are 2 more in active discussion. There is 1 that expires at the end of this fiscal year. So making good progress on getting our way through these and getting them completed. There is a legacy part of this group that has the PPO. They will all now be moving to the high deductible plan effective this July 1st. As we've done in the past, we're going to front load 75% of the deductible in that first year for the group that's transitioning. And we have educational forums planned with the group with our outside consultant on benefits so they can understand how how the HDHP works and fully utilize that through payroll deduction and all the other things you should be aware of transitioning that for the first time. We have minor bump ups in their premium contributions that start July 1st of this year to 12.5%, then 13%, then 13.5%. Other than that, there was some minor cleanup in some of the contract language. Referring to the Janus decision, making sure we had titles of people in HR updated correctly, typographical errors, things of that nature. But you should have, and Simon, I know, is passing this along, an exhibit that sort of breaks down the overall cost in terms of what the impact of the GWI is, what the cost of the step change is, what we think the impact of the shift in the tuition reimbursement is, the increase to us in terms of the deductible contribution for the HDHP, but then the gross save that attaches to that from the conversion to the high deductible plan. And then finally, I'd point out that we had built into the current year and next year's budget 2% increases. That just turned out to be fortuitous. That wasn't, any kind of pre-knowledge of where we were going to land. But you'll see that it's decremental in terms of cost, not incremental over the next 4 years to us when you roll through all of those factors. So the Board of Education approved this unanimously on Tuesday night, and that's why we're bringing it forward to subcommittee today.
Thank you, Mr. Penn. I see that Mr. White has a question already.
Yes, I'm in favor of this, but I just had a question. The tuition reimbursement, that sounds pretty progressive. Is your hope that some of these folks are going to become certified teachers if
Yes.
they stick with it long enough? And has
Yes.
that been the case?
I think it's too early in terms of our starting to convert but we recognize that the tuition reimbursement where it wasn't keeping pace with the market. And we don't want it to be in disincentive. We want it to be incentive for people to continue with their education and become certified teachers. So yeah, this is definitely one of the pathway roles that we want to see people move to certified staff.
Good.
Fantastic. Mr. Waxenberg.
Yeah, I expect the state to amend its certification standards to allow these people a freer path to begin with. But that said, What's an S-273 lane? What is that? You have your associates and your bachelors. What's the S-273 lane on the salary schedule? I don't
I'm
think you have
trying to
anybody there.
remember.
According to your TEG, you don't have anybody there, but I was just curious as to what that refers to. Is
Mr. Waxman, I'm trying to recall off the top of my head, and I don't recall what it is. I'll follow up through Simon to share that information.
all right, that's fine. The other issue is I also will vote in favor, though I would like to see a higher percentage of 3%, but seeing as all parties have already committed or agreed to the 2%, I think when you have a group such as this that has been held at zeros for such a long time due to the economic situation of Hartford, trying to get back is very difficult. And if you look at CCM's pattern of wage settlements, they are in the 3% range GWI into the later years of the contracts. I'm not going to intervene in your collective bargaining other than to say, depending on the salaries and the importance, if you will, your vacancy rate is not that great, but still there is a vacancy. And my assumption is the task that these individuals are asked to perform at the pre-K level is obviously in an urban setting very important. It's unique because I don't think any other system, and correct me if I'm wrong, has this category of individual so named. So you have been trying to establish a cadre of folks that are absolutely necessary for the Hartford school system.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I applaud you for that. But I want to make sure that we don't chop our nose off to spite our face, I guess, or vice versa, which is the salaries to attract these individuals to move into a certified position, depending upon future legislation, could be a little higher. But then again, that's my own personal perspective. But I say that to you because I don't know what the other contracts are that are out there.
Right.
But depending on the wage level right now, I wouldn't be adverse to seeing a percentage higher, depending upon your fiscal conditions. 1% in these particular cases may be in the, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 20,000, which is not that great. So I guess that's a strategic policy decision that the board has to make, but I just think that it's something to look at for the future. That's all.
Appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. Andrea, just so that you're aware and the group is aware, it's page 7 on Appendix A. So Mr. Penna, I think it's your memo. And when I was looking through the contract is when I noticed there was a difference. So it's August 25th that is noted in the tentative contract, but your memo says the 23rd.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll be going by the 25th then as a result of that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then when we get ready to move it to the MARB for the next one, we can just change the date. Have you change the date?
Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you. That's all. Any other questions? I don't have any. I'm prepared, looking for a motion.
So moved.
Oh, thank you,
Second.
Mr. Waxenberg, and thank you, Mr. White. Any other discussion? Last chance. None. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye,
please.
please. Andrea, I
Perfect.
didn't
Thank
hear
you.
you. Sorry.
That's okay. Aye.
Okay, thank you. All. Is Mr. Falsigno still with us? I did not hear him.
I don't see him.
He was having connectivity issues. All right, if he can hear us and he can't speak, then we will follow up and make sure that he is in favor. All right, moving on. Thank you, that motion carries. On to the next agenda item. We are at 10:23. I guess in favor of time, because I thought that you might have had a bond, a council for you for a labor council for this particular contract, but we're all set. There is one request that has been asked, which is Julian had requested if we could please move the grand list up. Just in essence of time, I don't want to get into deep conversation about the Board of Ed, have to disconnect and try to make sure that we have the assessor's time, as he has a hard stop today at 11:30. So I would suggest if I could get a motion to please move the grand list up to above agenda item number 5. And then we can allow the discussion of the grand list. Julian, is the assessor still with us on the line?
John Phillip is on the call, and
Yes, I'm working to get my technology right.
Okay, that's okay. I'm going to make the motion. I just wanted to make sure before I did that, I wanted to make sure I had all the right parties. Could I please get a motion to move agenda item number 6 up to before number 5? And that is the grand list.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. White. Andrea, thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Very good. All right. Over to the city, you'll see that today that we've included the City of Hartford's October 22nd net taxable grand list, which is included here, and we have John Phillip to walk us through this. Thank you, John.
Welcome. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. There's not, I apologize. I had a request for a spreadsheet that I usually do starting around now for the budget season. But I haven't done it yet for this year's list. That spreadsheet is designed to show tax effects on different types of property.
Yep.
And there was no large scale changes this year, so I just haven't done it yet. But I can quickly. In any event, real estate dropped a little bit. I think that's largely the function of the actions of the Board of Assessment Appeals last year. There were, there were lots of buildings that were improved. There were some that were demolished, but the bulk of those changes were what the board did last year. We really haven't started much. There haven't been many changes in the court system yet on the 2021 list, although there are a lot of pending appeals. Personal property was the bright spot. That was largely Eversource and a couple of the large insurance companies. But we did have, there's been a lot of churn in the personal property portion of the list. A lot of small businesses have gone out, a lot more have started. I think the trend is generally good. Sun Life was a substantial addition to the list this year. Actually, I think over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, except for the revaluation, personal property has been the strong suit. And motor vehicles seem to be kind of normalizing. Between 2020 and 2021, the motor vehicle portion of the grand list grew 25%. That was a serious distortion in the market. That is correcting the plus 11%. That's close to what we were seeing maybe 8 or 10 years ago on a regular basis. Cars just always seem to go up 10% a year. Maybe we're back to that now. I don't know, but 11% for the cars is much more normal than plus 25. So that's a brief overview. I'm happy to take any questions.
I just realized that I turned my mic off. It would be helpful if you could please complete that. I know that we had a document and
Yeah.
a list from the prior year, which then showed the market value, and it gave us the ratios and each one of the categories that you categorize as real property. It would be helpful that we need that for the full MARB meeting for our board members.
Sure.
Okay. Any questions? No. All right. We hear none. Thank you, and look forward for
Thank
an
you.
update for the full MARB.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Over to now the new agenda item 6, which is review discussion of the Board of Education's budget and an update. And Mr. Penn, if you are with us we've included in this packet Mr. Penn's Board of Ed deficit mitigation plan over fiscal year 23 operation, as well as his fiscal year 24 budget that will highlight some of the upcoming challenges. And at the March 9th full board meeting, we received an update, a little bit of a highlight of the 24 budget, and answered some questions about the budgeted deficit. Today we'll turn it over to him to walk us through where he's at today with closing some of those
Sure.
gaps.
So if you'll indulge me, I've got to kind of flip back and forth between two different presentations to tell this whole story, right? Because
sorry.
if that's okay.
No.
So I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Okay. Yes, please do.
All right.
I thought you were going to ask us to do that for you. Okay.
That's quite all right. I can do it. All right, and in the interest of time, I promise I will not go through every slide here because this is a fairly long deck. But this was the presentation that we did in our public hearing in January that I think kind of tells a pretty good background as to how we ended up at a $24 million deficit and sort of what we plan to do going forward. I'll follow that up with the secondary presentation that we did in March on how we propose closing it through mitigation. And then I'd be happy to take any questions anybody has. But I'm going to skip through a few of these just to, as I said, in the interest of time. But if you have any questions, having seen this, feel free to ask. I'm going to take a look real quick at sort of where our enrollment is and sort of where we see kind of how our budget is going to play out. One of the things that we talk about every year with the public is our equity-based starter budget. It's a means of allocating dollars to schools based both on enrollment in the school, but then also addressing need within the school. Concentrations of poverty, concentrations of English learners, concentrations of students with disabilities, and trying to make sure that as we allocate resources, which of course are scarce, we try to do it in a way that is equitable. And what I try to stress is that equitable doesn't mean equal. It means that we're trying to drive resources to where the greatest need is. So this is actually the second year that we've used this in our budgeting process. I'm kind of a fan of it because I think it does a fairly good job of laying out the resources and what our intent is with it. But let me kind of jump into sort of where we were. When we first discussed this with the public and with the board back in January, what we were looking at was projected revenues of just under 417 million, projected expenses of almost 441 million, driving a deficit of 24 million. Now, some of these factors you've heard about from me as we've gone along during this year. The revenues drop in state funding due to the drop in the magnet school operating grant. That was over a $7 million impact. We've seen tuition costs increase pretty significantly, both in terms of the number of Hartford residents attending CREC schools and CREC's 3-year plan for increasing tuition. We've seen a big spike in our transportation costs, especially along students with disabilities that are receiving door-to-door transportation. And then the normal flow of activity around fringe benefits, around utilities, around anything else that we would typically see, something that has an inflationary impact on our budget, of course, right? Enrollment is becoming more problematic for us as well. And you'll see sort of where enrollment has gone from the 2016-17 year down to 22-23, our actual. That's a loss of almost 4,000 students. We're projecting a 1.5% drop into next year, down to 16.5. But one thing to kind of keep in mind, it's not just the drop in students, it's the mix of students that actually affects us too. So the drop in actual student count will impact us on some of our state grants. It'll impact us on some of our federal title grants. But the magnet school operating grant is driven strictly by the number of suburban students that are attending our magnet schools. Our local residents attending our own magnet schools really aren't a factor into that grant. But when we looked at the number of students that are suburban students attending our magnet schools in 22-23, it was 500 less than what we had projected it to be. So we received a little over $13,300 per student from the state for that grant. So a loss of 500 students versus our plan is a pretty significant amount of money. And that was a big driver of what we're experiencing for the 22-23 deficit. That would then have a continuation effect into 23-24. All right. So basically, when we look at our estimated revenues going into, and again, this was back in January, you'll see how that breaks out. Education cost sharing, our local taxes, federal grants up a little bit, but then the big change is in the other state grants coming down to just under $100 million. So that's over a $5 million drop. And when you look at our total revenues, when we first put these estimates together, it was a $6 million drop in revenue in just 2 years. Now, obviously, that's not the direction you want these going in. You know, inflationary costs being what they are, long term, you want to try and have your costs and your revenues moving in the same direction and hopefully at the same pace. And you'll see on this next slide, it's just a much bigger breakout of all the different revenue sources. You've seen this in a different form in the monthly financial reports I provide to you, right? And this is just an annual look at where we think things are going into next year. Okay, then we look at the flip side, right? Where do we think we were going to land for expenses for 23-24? The proposed budget, as they came in, as I mentioned, were just under $441 million. And you'll see the big drivers of that. The tuition expense, the transportation expense, to a lesser extent, the utilities, and on down the line, with some puts and takes that, you know, and the interesting thing is, I've pointed out to people, if you look at the first couple of lines here, right, it's what I call our big four: staffing costs, tuition, transportation, utilities. If you get through those four items, the whole remaining amount of the budget is only $26 million. So, you know, if you think about quote unquote controllable spend, we could have cut every other number in that budget and it still would have really barely impacted it barely would have gotten us back to a balanced budget. And that's some of the struggle that we have now with some of the systemic budget challenges that we have. Okay. So this is a little more breakout on the interdistrict magnet grant. I'm going to skip past that. Here you kind of see what I was describing in terms of the impact, particularly from CREC, in terms of the higher student count and also the tuition increase. So the CREC is rolling out a 3-year increase, $900 per student this year, $800 per student next year, $700 per student in 24-25. So that's kind of how this is going to play out. So even if that student population doesn't grow any further, we know that there's a further impact coming in 24-25. Okay. So I'm going to skip past some of the planned spending per school. One of the reasons we include this when we're presenting to the public is I think there's a perception that we spend more on magnet schools on a per student basis than we do on the neighborhood schools. And as you're going to see here, that's not true. One of the things that really drives out of that equity model is there's variation based on need within all those schools, right? And as you might expect, you know, some of the more expensive schools to run are the more comprehensive high schools where you have to have a lot of different core course offerings that take place in there, right? But as we look at this, there's a lot of variation between magnet schools. There's a lot of variation between trying to do a comparison from neighborhood schools to magnet schools. And that, to me, is sort of a validation that that equity-based model is working for us. If I saw very, very tight ranges on these numbers, I'd have to come back and say that equity-based approach is not working, because that's not what you should expect to see. Okay. All right. So when we got to January, we started thinking about, okay, we can't go in here with a $24 million gap. How are we going to start to mitigate this? Well, the first thing I was thinking was, and the rest of the team, I should say, is we have a fairly high number of vacant positions within the group, within the district. Is that an opportunity for us to trim some of those? What can we reduce in terms of consolidation of programs and platforms and non-personnel expenses where possible? And in particular, looking at central office expenses for those. You know, we were thinking at the time, could we leave a small budget task going into the 23-24 year that we then would have to cover and figure out how to solve sometime between now and the end of June of 2024. Then the last thing we were thinking about was strategic use of ESSER funds to try to offset part of that deficit, and then re-examine our other revenue assumptions to see if they were too conservative. And that work produced a range of somewhere between 18 and 26 million in terms of what we thought we can get to. Oh, there we go. And this gives you some sense of where all those vacancies sit, and in particular, 270 vacancies sitting within the general fund. Okay. So as we got through the end of that period, we said, okay, we know we have a lot of work to do. We said several time to review things with the board coming back in February. And one of the things that the board did is they added another public meeting to the schedule at the end of February to make sure we had socialized this budget as much as we possibly could. And I think that wound up being a good call, because this is a significant impact to the residents in terms of where this budget's going to play out. And it was another opportunity for us to share some of the struggles we had in balancing the budget. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. I'm going to get out of this presentation. If you bear with me. And try and reshare again. Bear with me on the technology here. This isn't my forte. Okay. So we go here. That's not what I want. That's what I want. Okay, we good again?
We are.
All right, excellent. All right. So by the time we had gotten to the beginning of February, we had taken a look at a few different things on the revenue side. Number one is we became aware of a new grant that the state was going to offer. Internally, we call it the new tuition offset grant. I don't think that's the formal name to it, but it looks like funds were going to be available to us as a result of a new grant that was introduced in the 22 legislative period that would provide funding if more than 4% of your residents were attending the RESC magnet schools. Correct, Learn, those are the two big ones for us. Now we had to estimate that. We really didn't have a good sense of, out of the $11 million that was appropriated, how much would flow through to Hartford. But knowing that we're the largest district in the Chef region, and by far the one that has more than 4% of its students attending those schools, we felt that $3 million was a fairly conservative estimate. And we actually have a conversation with the state on Friday where I'm hoping to get a more definitive answer if they sort of solve for what our final number is going to be on that. We took a look at our special education billing. This is where we bill the sending districts for the special education services that we provide to the students. That wound up being about $500,000, and ESSER funds, we were now saying 9.2 million. And let me pause there for a second, because I think the context is important. As we got into the mitigation discussions, some of the board members were pushing pretty adamantly for using all of the ESSER funds we had available to close the entire $24 million gap using ESSER. We know that's a fundamentally bad idea, but we wanted to recognize the fact that we did have available ESSER funds to us, with the very strong caveat. Listen, this sets up that much more of a gap for 24-25 because you were not going to have that $9.2 million available to you. On the expense side, we took a look at some of the school vacancy eliminations. We wound up eliminating 12 vacant roles across the district. That was a mix of about half certified, half non-certified. We changed our vacancy rate assumptions. When we originally put the budget together, we were assuming a 4% vacancy rate. For context, we're running at 11 right now. So what we said was, well, we think the likelihood of us getting down past 6, in other words, cutting half of the vacancy rate that we have now, would still feel aggressive in some respects. So we said, okay, if we go to 6% vacancies from 4% vacancies, that's an impact of $5.4 million. That's not just salary, that includes fringe in that number as well. We did initially take a look at central office eliminations that were about $3 million. That was a mix of vacant staff, but more programmatic and non-personnel expenses. As we then continued through the process, by the end of February, we were then looking at same impact on revenues. But then we said, okay, central office, we did a couple of more tweaks, but then there was some conversation around we need to temporarily move out of our central office location. Because if you don't know, we're in a high school that's being reconstructed right now. They will be literally ripping off the exterior walls and the roof and all of the HVAC systems associated with that. So it really becomes a non-workable space during that time frame. And there is some conversation going on right now as to whether or not that cost will be eligible to include within the overall construction project, or if we have to pay for those relocation costs on our own. So right now there is a lease that's going to City Council, I believe next week. The approximate cost of the relocation is about $1.4 million. It spreads out over 3 fiscal years, the way it plays out, and the impact is a little over $600,000 for 23-24. But we felt for conservatism, we had to put that into our equation. We went through a second round of budget meetings with schools, ticking and tying numbers back out again in terms of, we shouldn't have cut this. We need to add this position back. It shouldn't have been cut in the first place. That actually added $400,000 back into the calculation. But then when we looked at all the turnover that we had experienced from when we sort of froze the staff in November to the time we got to the end of February, that turnover savings was about $1.2 million. So we also factored that in. All right. So you then wound up with an expense level of $431 million. Now, you'll notice in the top right-hand corner of this slide, we had a remaining gap to be mitigated of just under $2 million. So that's a little bit under half of 1% of our operating budget. We built that in as a budget task. It's a single line item now that basically says we need to go identify this between now and 23-24. And the board was comfortable with that, with the proviso that we continue to update them throughout our regular financial reporting on how we were doing in terms of closing that gap. Okay. And that's kind of where we played out. So the final approved number from the board wound up being that 429, 382, 852 to match the projected revenue that we had. Okay. All right. At that point, happy to take questions. And one last thing I will share is that we are in the process of developing out the final budget book. I know some of you are used to seeing that. We expect to have that finished today. I do need to take a fourth round of proofreading through that to make sure it's all right. But then I'll work with Simon to make sure that's distributed to everybody once it's ready for publication.
Thank you, because a number of the slides that you went through today, I know that I had my team following up with you yesterday as I was looking for those documents, as I was used to seeing them within the budget book. And I use them in my review prior to, going through the and I think that the board members will also be looking for that information. So that will be great. I did have one question before I ask the members. You had one slide that was up, and bear with me. Take a look at it. The one slide that you had up that showed that you were down by $6 million. For me, it's a revenue assumption, and it's on page 5.
Yeah.
And that, I think you're familiar with it. Are you able to put that back up again or no?
Yeah, I think so. Let's do this. Let's this one. Bear with me as I try to find it.
That's okay.
Yeah,
You're
it's probably
getting
this one.
close.
Yeah.
That's it. That's definitely
Yeah.
it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So my question to you is, one thing, if we look at the private grants and the tuition billing, and in 21 to 22, you said you had a $1.5 million there.
Yep.
Budgeted. And then into 22, 23, you have a 4.8 budgeted. And then you moved over for 24, a 5.7. So while you increased to 5.7, you then stated in here that you wanted to get to the more realistic number that of your revenue, your actual revenues are coming in higher at about $4 million. If that had been the trend, would you not think that the 22 budget was actually shortchanged and then by $4 million, and then instead of having a gap of $6 million over the 2-year comparisons, that you would have one that would be a $2 million?
So let me try and clarify. The $4 million figure in that context refers to our special ed tuition billing.
Okay.
Right. And in the first draft of the 23-24 budget, we had only had $3.5 million in there. I now think we're going to come in at about $4 million for 22-23. So that's where we raised the 23-24 number. And this line tends to have volatility, not so much because of the billing, but it tends to have volatility also because we work with a lot of foundations and a lot of Hartford area partners. And so it's not always that we receive something from those partners in every given budget year. So this is a line I try to stay a little bit more conservative on, just knowing that there's that variability in there.
Okay. But you can understand my point.
I do.
Okay. Then if I move over, I have one question. It does state that the COVID is not included, but if I look at the federal grant line and it being very high in the $32 million for 22, and then moving down, to, it dropped to the 26 and you're bringing it back up to the 27. And you're saying that it's you have a carry forward. So if a carry forward is included, it's not telling me the exact amount, of the grants. You're just carrying it over into the next year. Would you say that drop, again, it's another $5 million. Would you say that drop was, and so initially I thought it was COVID, but I can see that it is not COVID related at all.
No.
Is it grant applications that you had less grant applications? You lost some specific grants that were out there, or they were phased out? I want to make sure that it's not a staffing, that you did not have the team to be able to actively go after applications in federal grants.
No, great question. What it really is, for the 21-22 year, districts were held harmless on their student enrollment at the 2018-19, i.e. pre-pandemic level. And then the federal government started moving away from that. So we had a pretty significant catch up in a drop in actual enrollment that began to impact those numbers. And we did have a fairly significant amount of carryover in that 21-22.
Okay.
And if there's those of you on the call that are unfamiliar, a lot of the federal entitlement grants, Title I, II, III, and IV, You have 2 years to spend the money. The bulk of it has to be spent in the first year, but you're allowed to carry over a portion of the funds into the following year.
Okay, thank you. Any other any questions from the board members? And I will hold. And you can stop sharing for just a minute.
I think I
Thank
just
you.
did.
Perfect. I was waiting for Mark because this is his expertise. Mark.
I don't know about that, but you're projecting, you moved up a vacancy percentage to 6%. You're
2%.
presently at around 10, between 10 and 12. Obviously, if you maintain a vacancy rate above that 6%, that will mitigate some of your anticipated costs as well, because you're budgeting for X, you're projecting Y, but based on the history, which I don't have, but my guess would be, are you running at about a 6% vacancy or higher? Or I assume you want to put in a number that you're comfortable with.
Right.
But in reality, if the 6% goes higher, you're going to see some savings that could balance off that $2 million gap.
Correct. That's very fair. Very fair.
And secondly, I noticed you're still paying for Achievement First. When is that memorandum of agreement up? Because you have an out there. And my understanding is you're going to take advantage of that out. At least I've been led to believe that you will. Is that 2025?
I'm hearing a bad connection. Same bad connection.
Yeah, a few of the screens look like they're
No, I'm not
frozen at
hearing
this
anything.
point.
Yep, frozen. We have a connectivity issue.
Well, I think Achievement First is a little less than 2 million if you go school by school. And I remember talking to the superintendent and her stating that when she first moved in to her position, this agreement was in place. And the question obviously is you're paying
Mark, we're not
for.
able to hear you. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Your connectivity is definitely bad. Do you want to try to? Yeah, it says poor connectivity. Do you want to try to call back?
All right, are you okay now? No.
Nope, still causing us problems.
I'll wait.
I can hear you good now.
You can?
Yes, I can. Let me see if Mr. is still with us. He is.
I am. I just turned the camera
think-
off to reduce the load on the
Very good.
on the
I think
connectivity.
I'll do the same and see if that helps. Shut down some bandwidth, I guess, right? Okay,
Yes.
Mark, try again, please.
The only remaining issue for today is the Achievement First. As I said, I know that previously you made an agreement with that charter school that you would pay some of their costs, even though you're not obligated to do so. When does that contract run out? Are you familiar? I think years ago, the superintendent said 2025, at which time she probably would not review it. I just didn't know what the status was of that particular grant that you're giving to Achievement First.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the expiration date, but I'm happy to follow up on that for you.
All right, thank you, because obviously that's not a concern. I'd just like to know what your projected future expenses are going to be regarding a non-Hartford public school. So,
Right.
and obviously at the other MARB board meeting, your cost drivers are clearly consistent with others, which is special education and transportation, which is an issue that I think needs to be dealt with policy-wise and legislatively, especially when you come to open choice school districts and how they should treat those differently from a excess cost sharing. But that's a political discussion down the road. But if that could be remedied, I think Hartford and the other, if you look at New Haven and Woodbridge getting into an argument now, any open school choice school system is going to find itself having political wars, if you will, because of those costs. So
Right.
that said, I think when the secretary is on board, maybe we can have a discussion where OFA can come in and do some runs for impact for the receiving school districts, because what's happening is it's obviously coming back to bite you in the behind.
Right.
Those are discussions, political policy and obviously fiscally, but those will probably should take place in the future. So, but other than that, I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, did you, when we were having some technical difficulties, I wasn't sure that we heard what you had to say. So I want to make sure that you did get all your comments in. But was it only about the achievement versus what you were discussing when we were having technical difficulties?
No, the vacancies, which he heard, you know, he's running.
Okay, no, I did hear that. Okay,
Okay,
I just wanted to.
I mean, you could spend a whole day talking about a Board of Education budget, but those are the ones that I'm concerned about or looked at for now.
Very good. Any other questions from the board members? Mr. White?
A quick one. I think you may have alluded to it, but the open choice discrepancy, at one point you said there was some potential for legislation to fill in that gap. Where does that stand, if I understood it correctly?
Yeah, the bill we're looking at most closely is House Bill 5003. There is an education committee meeting, I want to say either today or tomorrow. So we'll be looking very closely to see if that bill is taken up during committee. Because there are a number of benefits that would accrue to Hartford Public Schools if that bill passes in its current form.
Positive or negative?
Positive.
Okay. Any other, while we're on that topic, are there any other bills that you're tracking?
There is one that deals with some of the special education costs.
Mm.
I want to say it's in the it's a Senate bill in the 1200 range.
Okay.
But you know, one of the things we're having a hard time getting a read on is how much appetite there is out there at the statewide level on bills that predominantly would have a positive impact on the urban districts.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Any other questions about the Board of Ed's budget? We do get another stab at this again. I'm going to, we are going to take this to the full MARB and so we'll get another opportunity. Mr. Penn, do you anticipate having more information or at a later date on the special education side of life?
Can you clarify your question?
Well, you know that you have the trends that you were providing us in the past and how the numbers are falling out and the impact to the budget. So I know that we're seeing where that, you know, that you have increases, but it doesn't have the underlying data.
All right. I can.
Mhm.
I need some time to pull that together because that's not just a me issue. It's got to come from a few different sources.
And that can be for a later date.
Very good. Thank you.
No, thank you. I know you have top priority to close some gaps. Mhm. All right, if we have no other questions, then we can then move on to the budget mitigation from the city, and we can thank Mr. Penn for providing us with your update.
Thank you.
Well, hello, Julian.
Good morning. How are
Long
you?
time no see.
I can give a brief update on the update report that we provided in the package.
Thank you.
And I'll just click through them one by one. Not all of them have seen activity in the last month, so I'll just touch on the ones where there are updates to give.
Very good.
The first one, which is the area of tax collection efforts. You'll remember from previous meetings that the contract that we had with MTS, whereby we split any collections that they made 50-50, that contract did expire at the end of last fiscal year. So what's coming in now is basically what's trickling in from, billing that was already in the pipeline. So there was an additional $40,000 in the last reporting period. So you'll see, $20,000 increase over the last report and what the city actually keeps. Similarly, and number 2, the focus is on collection on private duty jobs. We picked up a few $1,000s there compared to the last report. On the third item, which is the grant activity, you'll see that grant activity continues to be pretty robust for the city. There's about $2 million of new grants reported there. 2 of the larger ones, grant for Bushnell Park Green Walk, that's actually bond funding, and $900,000 of federal funding for work at the Riverfront Park. And I believe that is at least some significant piece of that is for the flood abatement or flood control. Item number 4, which is energy efficiency, the staff position that would be the leader or coordinator on those measures has been vacant for some time now. That measure is actually more or less, or for practical purposes, is on hold. And in workers' comp, we have some updated figures. We did have a couple of large payments, a large medical lien payment in January and a stipulated agreement. We're still projecting to come in about 5% below budget this year, which would equate to about $250,000 and still running below prior years' actual claims activity. And then the other update in this area is that the PMA 24 program, which is a nurse triage call program where injured workers can call and be directed to the most appropriate level of care. We now have all departments participating in that program. Library was just added, with the only department to be added at this point is fire. So they will be the last to join into that program. And that, I think, rounds out the measures for which we had activity this last month.
Thank you.
And
One
then-
question. Go ahead.
Sure thing.
Nope, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this plan will get a major refresh as we head into FY24. So we're buttoning up the budget now and either adding or recasting some of these measures and some of the projections.
Very good. The vacancy that you have in energy efficiency opportunities, if you've got the position on hold, is there any consideration of hiring a consultant to do some of that work? And it could be a project-based item, and then it's just, somebody comes in and just focuses on those efficiencies. I've done that in my career, and I'm just wondering if that was taken into consideration. Not necessarily you need a full position for that, but a project can sometimes really bring some savings. A consultant.
So the position, my understanding is that the position itself isn't so much on hold as it just hasn't been filled. So there hasn't been a champion to really drive this particular measure forward as there would be if the position was filled. In the work on these types of this is a big project, so it will necessarily, I believe, that we have, facility related consultants engaged in a number of areas that would, be contributing of one form or fashion to these kinds of savings. Long-term plans for, modifications of facilities and where systems can be swapped out or improvements to the building shell, things like that. So it's more than the one person would be already, but we'll keep that in mind. If we can't fill it, it's a good point. We could potentially hire a consultant to take charge and be the lead.
Yeah, as it is one of the second largest items that you're using as a mitigation measure, but if you're not really using it as a measure, then it's not a mitigation measure,
Understood.
So, and I know that you're going to take a look at all of these. I just wanted to put forth another option.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And the other item with the contract of the collections company going away, and that was drawing in off of the old debt. We were seeing in the past what the trend was on the receivable side, and if anybody is taking a look at, is it valuable for you to be able to go back under contract again if it provides you with some additional funding, and or no, we're not at that place. We don't have that amount of old debt that we need a collection company to actively do that. If the debt is receivables are going to sit on the shelf and nobody's going to actively work them, then I would recommend that you have a consultant that does do that, even if you're getting 50 cents on a dollar, because if they're not being worked, then you're not going to get anything, right? They're write-offs. So
Right,
that's
and
something.
so, yeah, no, I was just going to say that the revenue collection side here is one area that I'm going to be working with the revenue manager to re-strategize and figure out going forward what, look at the receivables and the aging reports and where we're getting which measures were the most effective, and figure out what our strategy is going forward, rather than just sort of letting the contract expire and not
Great.
come up with additional measures to keep us collecting. So
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions from the MARB members? All right. Thank you, Julian. I'm going to move down to the next agenda item, which is an update on the Milliman contract. We have executed the contract. I think I mentioned that at one of the prior meetings, and we will be holding a kickoff meeting with Milliman and the Board of Education and OPM staff tomorrow. And Chief Penn will be joining us, and we will then start to look at this particular contract that this committee had requested for us to take a look at the differences in the health insurance plans, the costs, and the overall. And that's my report out on the Milliman contract. I do not have anything under other business. Does any of the other board members? All right. How about a motion then to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mark.
I'll second.
Thank you, Andrea.
Second.
Appreciate it. Okay. All right. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you all, and got you back 45 minutes of your day.
thank you.
Thank you.
Much
For the-
obliged.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good day.